On the occasion of the World Population Day, we are interviewing today a veteran demographer, Ashish Bose. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us on To The Point. My first question I'd like to start the interview with, since today is World Population Day, we've been hearing terms and coined by the Western world, and you also said that we shouldn't be carried away by these terms, such as population explosion. Do you really put any relevance to these terms as such?
I think this expression population explosion is quite alarmist, and it is out of fashion these days. We use the word population stabilization.
Right.
For example, my latest book is called The Quest for India's Population Stabilization. The ultimate objective is to stabilize the population, neither grows nor declines. If it declines, it is also a problem. For example, in Europe, the population is declining in so many countries. They are short of labor force, and that means less workers, less production, less income, less GDP.
But in India's context, more and more people are moving from the villages to urban centers. Urbanization is happening on a scale never seen before. Apparently, some figures, if I'm not wrong, our population, about 350 million of India's population, by 2020 or 2025 will move to the cities. Are we prepared for such a population exodus from villages to the cities?
It's a good question. The answer is no. We are certainly not prepared. Therefore, we have to have a human settlement policy, habitat. Many years back, I attended a conference in Europe that was in Canada, on habitat, the whole concept of habitat, that human settlements, right from the megalopolis to these tiny villages, we should have a pattern and not have uncharted migration at random, try your luck category.
But that's what's happening in India. Migration from villages to cities is on a huge scale.
Yeah, but it is also not quite true. I have been studying lately, by the way, the 2011 census figures will throw tremendous light on this subject. You can come to me when the data are out. Unfortunately, in spite of so much of computerization, the Census Commissioner says migration data will be out only next year. That's quite disappointing for students of migration.
Right.
Now, what is happening is, it is not a blind migration from rural to urban areas in search of work. You will starve yourself to death if you just come to a city. Nobody cares. Nobody is going to employ you. So a precondition to such migration is presence of somebody who will sponsor you. Like if I want to go to America, then
there'll have to be a sponsor.
I'll have my elder brother to sponsor me. So this is true in the situation about rural to urban migration within the country also.
Right.
See, my domestic helper who served you water, I asked him, how did you come from that remote Jalpaiguri district, which is near Darjeeling? He said, one of my uncles is a resident here.
Yeah, so he sponsored him, and that's how they come.
And he said, you come to me first, and I will try to get you a job.
I wanted to touch upon the elderly population of the country. Now,
Yes.
we, of course, India has been, it's lucky to have such a young population. More than 35% of the population is very young.
Yeah.
But we also have a substantial percentage of the population which are elderly.
Yeah.
Around 13 to 14%, I think, by 2020, and even by 2030, it could be 17% of the whole population.
Yes.
Are our elderly getting the kind of care that they need or they should be getting currently?
No.
And why is that?
Because our perception is still that India is a young country, there are very few old people. It is not true, because in terms of absolute numbers, the number of elderly is very substantial, and it will grow. I have a whole book on this subject called Growing Old in India, which I have written in collaboration with Mala Kapoor Shankar Das. And she has collected case studies of the elderly people. How are they faring? How are they surviving? And sometimes it is really tragic
Right.
to see. And nobody wants to go to old people's homes.
Right. But do you think the state of healthcare for elderly in our country, do you think the government has enough programs and initiatives to actually cover that sort of a huge area, or do you think they've come up short at some point?
No. They cannot have a short sample online. It is not collecting data. For collecting data, a sample is okay. But if you are introducing a welfare measure, then you have to think of the whole country. At least the states have to think of their own old people and so on.
Right.
And so we have, some states have good programs, some don't. Kerala, for example, has the highest proportion of old people.
Right. I also want to talk a bit about population imbalance in the country.
Yeah.
Now, the ratio to female children versus male children is sort of skewed. For every 914 girls, there are 1,000 boys. And if this continues, according to the figures that I have, the Lancet is the medical journal published in the UK. They said 7 million fewer girls and boys by the end of 2030. Now, isn't that a serious problem facing the country right now?
Look, Lancet has great respectability, and you are quoting Lancet. 10 years back, I wrote about this question of female feticide and skewed sex ratio, as we call. In India, sex ratio is number of girls per 1,000 boys. With the West, it is the other way about. Number of boys per 1,000 girls.
Right.
So you have to get the terms right also. So I wrote about that, and this is a very serious problem. And now I read in today's papers, I suppose, that the government is wants to introduce death penalty for those who indulge in female feticide.
Right.
But it is oversimplifying things. Look, why don't they want girls? Because
it's lack of education.
Cost of marriage, no. The cost of marriage of a girl after paying dowry is so high that they cannot afford to have a girl, so they want only boys. So I did in Jat villages 20 years back surveys myself that what is your preference? How many boys, how many girls you want? They all said 2 boys, 3 boys, but nobody says 2 girls, 3 girls.
Right.
At the most they would say 1 girl,
Right.
grudgingly.
But do you think the issue of female feticide is the only big factor driving the imbalance in the population? Do you think other factors are responsible as well?
There are so many other factors. For example, I have analyzed what I call the north-south divide.
Right.
The southern states have done fairly well in controlling the family size because of education and various other factors. So our standard measure is called TFR, total fertility rate, which means the number of children a woman would have in a reproductive life.
Right.
Now the TFR is all low in the south, but it is high in UP, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan. So which I coined a term called Bimaru.
States, a quite well-known term.
And that is really concern of that.
Right.
Now that I coined to advise the late Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi.
Right.
Because he had asked me for advice.
Mr. Bose, we'll talk about Bimaru States as well as the north and south divide. I would like to speak a little more about that, but that's after a short break.
Yes.
Don't go anywhere. Ashish Bose will still be in conversation on the other side of the break. Welcome back. You're still watching To The Point, and we're still in conversation with Ashish Bose, veteran demographer. Sir, we talked about the north-south divide, and you worked a lot on the north and south divide. One of the major factors why states like Kerala are doing so well, whether it be maternal mortality or population control or care for the elderly, is because of the education system in
The
that
main
state.
factor.
The main factor.
Yes.
How far behind do you think the northern states are lagging behind states like Kerala?
Very far, because if you see the literacy rate, literacy means ability to read, and writes a simple letter, and that also applies to 7+ population. Then the literacy rate for females, for in Bihar, for example, is shockingly low. So when you have, forget education, forget even schooling, only literacy, and that is so low. So in such a situation, we cannot count education as a factor.
Right.
Now, coming to this term Bimaru, I coined, it is not to prejudice some people or find fault with them. It is a harmless acronym because BI stands for Bihar, MA for Madhya Pradesh, R for Rajasthan, U for Uttar Pradesh. This is the standard principle in all demographic yearbooks. We start alphabetically, and in our census reports also they all start alphabetically. So A to Z. But Bimaru in Eastern UP, I studied in Allahabad University, so I know Bimaru, you call a fellow who is sick, Bimaru. Bimaru.
So what you meant was, of course, there are 6 states if you look at how they develop their populations as well.
No, focus on them.
Focus on
So I told the late Rajiv Gandhi that if you want to solve India's population problem, the international lobbies have taken you for a ride. They are advocating the Kerala model. Kerala model is not at all applicable. First of all, Kerala is a very small state, hardly 2 or 3% of India's population is there. Then in Kerala, there is neither rural nor urban. It is a vast settlement which merges into urban.
Right. So it's in the grey area.
So, so Kerala is not a good example. So you focus on challenging states, and these are these Bimaru states.
Right.
So Bimaru states, challenge doesn't mean you get them, catch hold of them and get them sterilized, as Sanjay Gandhi's Kubuddhi, I used to say. Kubuddhi means bad advice. That means you develop, focus, spend more money. And why has the Prime Minister called a meeting of UP and Bihar to discuss their package for them?
Right.
So it is still on.
Absolutely. Let's talk about poverty alleviation and the state of poverty in the country. Now, we'll come to poverty numbers in just a bit. I don't want to start with that. But how has the scenario changed, sir? Since about 1986, you started working with the late Rajiv Gandhi, the Prime Minister then. The past 20 years, as you've seen them, do you think poverty alleviation has happened even a little bit in, say, even the Bimaru states or all over the country?
No, not even in Delhi. Only this morning, I talked to the Tellawala, who was a hawker, who was selling fruits, very substandard fruits. And I said, where do you come from? He said, Badayu district in Uttar Pradesh. And how much do you earn? He said, I can't, how much per day? He said, I can't reply because on some days I earn 0, nothing. But in 1 week, I will earn 100 rupees or so. That is poverty.
Right.
So that led me to conduct a study on who is India's Aam Aadmi and have individual case studies about his life history.
Right.
And I find poverty has deepened, poverty has increased. The rich are richer and the poor are poor.
And that divide is just, the chasm is just growing.
Yes.
And what do you think about the poverty numbers? Recently, the Planning Commission came out with first set.
Come on.
What is your take on that?
I have already written in Hari Jai Singh's journal, Power Politics, that Planning Commission should be abolished, closed down as an austerity measure.
Right.
It serves no purpose.
Right.
I mean, this is to please the government that poverty figures are going down.
But the numbers that they came out with, the poverty lines, about 22 per day for rural
Ridiculous,
and urban. Do you think that was completely something uncalled for and the Planning Commission trying to hide their ineptitude in gauging the poverty in the country?
Known as the Economic Weekly, Political and Economic Weekly, EPW, they wrote that Planning Commission doesn't know how to count the poor. their editorial. And that sums up the situation.
Right.
See, if you ask these great people that have you ever talked to a poor man? Do you know how he lives? The answer will be no. They only talk of macroeconomics, aggregate data. So my next book is on the Aam Aadmi of India. Who is the Aam Aadmi? And there are case studies supported by photographs.
Do you think the rise in food inflation in the past, say, 3 to 5 years, the meteoric rise in food inflation has also added to the problem of poverty that Aam Aadmi faces?
No. This is the main problem. The 2-digit food inflation plus corruption in all walks of life. Both these factors have added together to increase the misery of the Aam Aadmi.
But do you think people in urban centers have a different kind of poverty than, say, people in rural centers? Is the difference between poverty?
We have to.
What is that difference between?
We have to differentiate because income levels are higher in urban areas than in rural. So we have to adjust for that.
Right.
That planning commission would know how to do that.
Right.
And they did adjust. They put some 28 and 32 or something like.
Right. The Tendulkar committee report the findings were sort of given up for the new findings. Do you think that was a right move by the planning commission? Do you think the Tendulkar report was quite in itself a strategic piece of work?
Tendulkar was a brilliant economist. He was once my colleague in Delhi School of Economics in Delhi University, and he. You partially read his report and don't get sense out of it. You read the whole report, and I have just received an invitation that there will be 2-day seminar in Delhi School of Economics on Tendulkar Committee's report. So you have to understand it. And for example, I have used in my writings Tendulkar's report to grade the states for comparative poverty, which is the highest, which is the lowest.
Right. So we'll talk about a little bit about the future, the next 10 years that India is going to face. But that's also after a small breather. Another small break. We'll come back with Ashish Bose and talk a bit more about the future outlook for India. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. You're watching To The Point. Sir, we talked about Bimaru States as well. Has the definition of Bimaru States for you personally, the man who coined the term, changed? And what are the new Bimaru States of this millennium? Do you think the same old states are lagging behind, or do you think new ones have come up?
Yeah, I had a look at the most recent data, and I find all the Bimaru states are intact. They are still Bimaru. Of course, there are comparative changes. For example, Rajasthan is better, and Madhya Pradesh still slightly better. But in terms of certain indices, like maternal mortality ratio, Madhya Pradesh is the lowest, very bad. So it depends on what indicator you have in mind.
Right.
Now, there will be new. For example, I find that West Bengal should be added to the list of Bimaru states, and it is not doing well at all. It is not doing well at all.
Do you think, slightly digressing from topic here, do you think the National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, or NREGA as we call it in popular parlance, do you think that has, in fact, the government obviously touts it as one of their premier social welfare schemes, but do you think it has worked as much as the government would like us to believe? Has it helped in poverty alleviation at all? Did the scheme work?
No. I have again done some field work on that, gone to villages. There is so much of corruption. You see, the fellow says that then they assured we will give you minimum wages. Suppose it is 100 rupees. The fellow is given 50 rupees. 50 rupees pocketed by the middleman, by the fellow who is in charge. So that is not helping this.
So you're saying the idea in itself was decent, but the corruption and that came in,
and the mismanagement.
Yeah, the mismanagement, the corruption sort of derailed the whole idea.
Yeah,
right.
But again, 100 days. Why 100 days? If you want to give food security employment security, it should be for 365 days.
Right, not just for 100
Not
days.
100 days.
Right.
Then what do you do for the remaining 265 days?
Right. So since you we talked about poverty numbers that the Planning Commission had come out with, since you said that they're only good for statistical assessment and data, is there an alternative by which the country can gauge the number of poor in the country?
But the question is, why do you want to count the poor? You have see that the number of poor goes down, and it will be seen. You will see everywhere the poverty has gone down. You don't have to count and notify to the world that our poverty figure was this, and now it is this.
Right.
No need.
So there's no need for an alternative either.
No need.
So you're saying good, solid policies will take care
will
of
be reflected in reality.
Right. So they won't need
your TV media is a powerful role. It is playing a powerful role.
Looking towards the future, sir. Looking towards the future now.
Yes.
The next 10 years, if you see it, which states do you think will perform based on the performance in the past 5 years or 2 years? Which states do you think will outperform other states in poverty alleviation?
Yes, this is a very, very good question. It's a tricky question because I was once thinking that Punjab will emerge as the best state. But then, when I see reality in Punjab, as depicted on the TV programs, also, that drinking has increased like anything.
Social fabric is sort of...
And then domestic violence, and then drugs. Then it is ruining the younger generation. So how do you say that it is number one state? So it is disqualified from being a number one state.
Right.
So
any other states you might think that might...
Haryana is going the same way.
So most of the northern states, the north-south divide comes into play again. The southern states are more educated and they do better.
But even then distress stories are coming about Kerala also, how in spite of their education, their domestic behavior is very bad.
A couple of weeks earlier, sir, I was talking to the country representative of UNFPA and we were talking about maternal mortality also. And she also mentioned the same thing, that political will is needed for healthcare services as well as population services to basically permeate the far-flung corners of the country. Do you agree that political will is the only way we can get into those corners of the country that no one really cares about?
Look, the last week I gave interview to Reuters and they asked me a similar question. And I said, look, I think, I may be wrong, I think that lack of competent political leadership is the root cause of all our economic problems. The economic problems emanate from lack of competent political leadership. And unless that is removed, the things will not improve.
Right. Given in the current global scenario, sir, where would you put in the table of countries around the world which have sort of managed to do some constructive work on population control, poverty alleviation and population welfare? Do you think India figures in that list at all?
Oh, look, what work have we done on population control? We made a mess and after that in 1977, the government was wiped out, the government in power.
Yeah, you're talking about the emergency and the forced sterilization.
So after that, no politician wants to even mention population control in his or her speeches anywhere. If you can, you should produce some documentation.
Right. But you're right. We hardly
absolutely, this is they have dropped it like a hot potato.
Right.
So I am reminded of J.R.D. Tata, the late J.R.D. Tata. He was deeply interested in population, and that is how I met him. And when I asked, this was in 1989, when I asked him about the scenario in the whole country, the similar question, he said, look, I am a short-term pessimist and a long-term optimist.
Right.
I would repeat his words.
Right.
I also feel I'll be dead and gone, but in the future, India will be better, surely.
Sir, I just wanted to know, we're coming towards the close and the end of this program.
Yeah.
in your view, like you just said, that J.R.D. Tata mentioned to you, he's a short-term pessimist and a long-term optimist.
Yes.
Do you share his views? Do you think the current policies of successive governments, not just the current government, successive governments,
Yeah.
say, take for example China, they coerce their people into that one-child policy. That's not the way to go about it.
It's too bad.
What is the alternative? What way should India take?
Alternative is to leave the people alone. They will decide what is best for them. Who are you to tell them? Have one child or two children or have all 1.8 children on an average. China has made a mess. If you see the latest story in Economist,
Right.
it is quite a harrowing story
Right.
about what they are trying to do.
Right.
Even now, in some remote areas, they are trying to enforce.
So my last question to you on this program would be, you've obviously, we mentioned that, everyone mentioned, the politicians of the country, the economists of the country, they speak about the advantage we have because we are such a young nation. More than half our population is so young. But do you think that tactical advantage or natural advantage, if I can call it that, will or can be translated into economic might or superiority around the world? Can we actually translate that into capital?
You may call me a pessimist, but I don't think we have an advantage. Because if you have millions of unemployed people, unemployable people, uneducated people, how are they an advantage to the country? How can they be called dividend? Demographic dividend. These are coins termed in the West, demographic dividend and so on. But I don't agree with all these demographic dividend.
Right. Ashish Bose, thank you so much for joining us on To The Point. Of course, that was Ashish Bose, veteran demographer. Like J.R.D. Tata once said, and my guest of course agrees, that he's a short-term pessimist but a long-term optimist. I think that's the way we all should think of, even if things are bad right now. Hope remains, because India is a young nation. Yes, there are problems, but there will be solutions as well if we manage to eliminate corruption out of our system and get some sort of political will going. Thank you so much for joining us on To The Point. Till next time, thank you and goodbye.